Hello, everyone. We'll get started. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar, Noticing, Wondering, and Creating in the Science and Art Classroom. My name is Tamara Goldbogen, and I am the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Endowed Chair of Arts Learning and the Director of the Arts Learning Collaborative at Weber State University. Today's webinar is a collaboration between Southern Utah University and Weber State University. I have to say I've enjoyed seeing everyone in the chat, letting us know where they are joining from. We have over 150 people from around the state of Utah registered for today's webinar, which we're really excited about. Before we jump into the webinar, I'm going to give you a quick introduction to today's presenters, go over a few housekeeping items and the schedule. So I'll jump right in. We have some amazing presenters today. We're lucky to be joined by Alisa Mendenhall, who is the State Elementary Science and STEM Specialist at the Utah State Board of Education. We have Adam Johnston. He's a professor of physics and director of the Center for Science and Mathematics Education at Weber State University. And we have Alisa Petersen, the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Endowed Chair of Elementary Arts Education and Director of Arts Fusion at Southern Utah University. Also, as a bonus, throughout the webinar, we have some quick videos from educators around the state with even more ideas for arts integration in other art forms that we're going to share with you. All right, here is a brief overview of the schedule. After our introduction, we'll get a SEEDS standards overview by Alisa Mendenhall. Then we'll take a quick 5-minute break so you can get ready for session 1 with Adam Johnston. We'll be doing a science workshop. Then we'll take another quick 5-minute break. And then we'll go right into our second session with Alisa Petersen on visual art. After that, we will have an opportunity for Q&A. For questions that you have for our presenters today, I encourage you to use the Q&A feature. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. You're welcome to enter questions into the Q&A feature at any time when you have questions throughout today's webinar, and then we'll get to as many as we can when we do the Q&A. Just so you know, after Alisa Mendenhall does her presentation, we'll answer a few questions just for her. And then after Adam and Alisa present, we'll do a little bit more questions with those two presenters. So that should give you the overview of the schedule, a few housekeeping things. At the conclusion of the webinar, I will put into the link, into the chat, a link for a Google form survey. This is going to provide us with some feedback about today's webinar. And when we receive your completed survey, we will email you a certificate of completion for relicensure points for today's webinar. In addition, I'm going to send you a link to a Google folder that's going to contain a wealth of information from today's event, both stuff that we're covering and additional resources that the presenters wanted you to have. So make sure you stay with us for the end of the webinar, especially if you're interested in relicensure points, and that you submit that Google form back to us. All right. Great. And now it is my pleasure to present Alisa Mendenhall, who will give us an overview of SEED standards.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited that everyone's here tonight. Thank you for being here. What a wonderful event. I'm excited to be here. I was asked to give a brief overview of the Science with Engineering Education SEED standards, just so that we can all have a similar foundation. Some of you may have had more interaction with the standards than others. I think in this brief overview, though, that everyone will gain something. So be watching for what is new and maybe insightful for you as we look at our SEED standards. So first of all, let's talk about the vision for science education. We have a new vision for science education in the state of Utah with our new standards. So it's important to know, what is that vision and how is it different from where we've come from? Right now, our new standards are built from a foundational document, the framework for K-12 science education. Now, this is kind of all the research that's been gathered throughout history in how do students best learn science. So all of that was accumulated, and then this report was given to say, these are the ways that we think right now will best support students in learning science. If you've taught 6th grade, you've been able to see these standards for a few more years. Grades K-5 or high school, these were new last year. So it's still pretty new to all of us. But know that you can look at this base research report anytime. The link is in the PowerPoint that you have access to tonight. It's a great report. It's actually a really good resource for you to have. So let's look at, in this framework, what they say a vision for science education should look like for our students today. So I'm wondering if we can take 2 minutes, so it's 5:06, we can take 2 minutes to read this vision, and then if you'll put in the chat, what is insightful or meaningful to you about this new vision for science education? So about 2 minutes, and then put in the chat what's insightful or meaningful to you about this new kind of direction we're taking science instruction. All right, it's 5:07. We'll come back at about 5:09. Your time starts now. Go. Let's take about 20 more seconds to put in your thoughts. Oh, I'm seeing wonderful things that this vision is helping us do in science education. It's inspiring, it's motivating this new way to teach science, our new vision. Also, this idea that science is for everyone, and that this helps our students be critical consumers and be able to participate in their world. I love that someone put in the chat that the students are more engaged this year as they've experienced this new form of instruction, that it's part of being lifelong learners. It is, it's helping them be a part of their world. And I think that's a really important thing. So thank you so much. I appreciate all of your comments in the chat. I think we have kind of an idea of what this new vision is. Let's look a little bit deeper now. So what does this mean exactly for your science instruction then? What are the instructional shifts that this vision then expects? So one of the really large shifts is we're no longer memorizing science facts. That's not really science. That's not how scientists work. Science is a way of being, a way of knowing. And that, as the research points out, says that our students should be living three-dimensional in science instruction, which looks at what scientists and engineers do, that's the practices, what scientists and engineers know and can apply, which are these disciplinary core ideas or science concepts, not memorizing facts, but what is this concept that will help me understand what I'm seeing and experiencing in my world and be able to apply it to my world. And the third dimension is this idea of how do scientists and engineers think? And those are cross-cutting concepts. So an important thing about instruction now is that these three dimensions of science learning, practices, cross-cutting concepts, and disciplinary core ideas need to play a part in everything teachers and students do in the science class. And they need to be woven in together in a way that builds cumulatively. So we don't focus on the practices for 3 months and then the cross-cutting concepts for 3 months and then the core ideas for 3 months. The idea is all of these ideas work together to help students understand the nature of science or the way of being in science. Another major shift is this idea that we're looking at how is this really relevant to our students? So this idea of phenomena-based instruction. And a phenomenon is some observable event that really drives student inquiry or student sense making. So what this new vision is saying is that our instruction really should start with some phenomenon. And a phenomenon should be something real world, something engaging and intriguing. Doesn't necessarily have to be flashy. It could be a glass of ice water that you've let sit out for a little bit, so there's condensation around the outside. That's something they'll experience in their world. It needs to be presented in a way that's accessible to the students, whether that's a picture, whether that's text, a video, some animations. How can they actually see this phenomenon or kind of get some information about this phenomenon? It also needs to be comprehensible to a wide range of students. So not just to maybe one set of our students, but what might be culturally relevant for all of our students? And is it developmentally appropriate for our age range that we're working with? There have been some misconceptions about phenomena. What phenomena are not is the teacher standing up and saying, here's this glass of ice water. See the water around the outside? That's condensation. This is where it comes from. That's not what we're talking about. What we are saying is how can we get our students to start observing and wondering? So what we might do with this glass of ice water is have our students look at it and say, what are you observing? And really get them to notice. Someone's going to notice that there's water on the outside of the glass. And based off of these observations, what does that make you wonder? What do you want to understand? So phenomena really are an opportunity for sense making or problem solving as we engage our students in the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts to help them ultimately understand the science concept or the disciplinary core idea. So let's look a little bit more closely at our Utah Science with Engineering Education or SEED standards. So I'm wondering if you'll take 62 seconds this time, no more, 62 seconds, and read this paragraph that's in the introduction to our SEED standards. And again, I want you to think about what's meaningful or important as a teacher for me to know about these SEED standards. Okay, your 62 seconds starts right now. Go. As you finish reading, if you'll put in the chat, what seems important to you to know? I'm seeing lots that say age appropriate. They were written by educators and scientists with our students in mind and educated citizenry. Collaboration, lots of collaboration went into writing these standards. Adam was there, I was there. They were written with our students in mind. They're how science should be learned. We hope that's what our research says from the framework. And they do value scientific thinking. Thank you. So really our standards are meant to really fulfill this vision of the framework, to really help our students be able to participate in their world. So how do I read the standards? It's interesting. There's a lot of hidden gems built into the standards that I think once you see it tonight, you'll go, oh, I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. So we're going to look at a kindergarten standard. The first sentence typically is the entire standard. So in this case, we have our kindergarten standard, and it's a second grade standard, and this is the fourth strand. Something you will want to know is that in the framework for K-12 science education, science concepts that are important for our students to know were decided. Then each of those concepts were looked at a K2 level, a 3-5 level, a 6-8 level, and a 9-12 level, so that our students can see these concepts build in complexity. Well, within this K2 band or 3-5 band or 6-8 band, the standards then were split into 3 parts based on where the writers felt like they best would fit for our Utah students. Within that, then, so 1/3 were then given to kindergarten in the K2 band. From that 1/3, the kindergarten writing team got together and said, how can we divide these up into a way that makes sense? And so they put them in strands, which is the second thing you see after the K. So we know that in kindergarten, this standard belongs to the second strand, or the second big group of ideas, and it's the fourth one in the strand, which says it's further down. So you wouldn't want to start with it. It would be more of a concluding standard as you're looking at teaching. So within our standard then, this first sentence, which says design and communicate a solution to address the effects that living things, plants and animals, including humans, experience while trying to survive in their surroundings. That's the entire standard. Now remember, we said the 3 dimensions were built into our standards. Well, the standards always start with what are we expecting the students to do, or the practice, and that's bolded. So here we can see the practice for this standard is design and communicate a solution. Now, something in that standard is going to be underlined. That's the cross-cutting concept, or the way of thinking. So we're wanting students to think about this idea of cause and effects. The rest is the science concept blended in. So we're looking at this idea of addressing that living things, what they experience while they're trying to survive in their surroundings. The original set of standards that came out for grades 6 through 8, that was what they had. What we found is that it's kind of challenging to know, so exactly what is a science concept? So at the very end of the standard, in parentheses, you will see different concepts listed. Those concepts, like Earth and Space Science 3C, they are found in that framework book. You can go right to the framework and find exactly what that is. There's also another place that I'll show you later where you can find it. So we know that the 3 dimensions are built into the standard. However, that's not all that we have access to right here. So I'm going to show you what else we have access to. After the what is the standard, there's additional information built just for the teachers. So we have this idea of, if it's in italics, that's engineering. What are we expecting them to do in engineering? So if you see italics, you know this is a science and engineering standard. There also might be something that says emphasize, saying this is where we really want you to focus. And if that might not be exactly clear, here are some examples of what that might look like. So in this, what they're saying is we want you to focus on this idea of a plant, animal, or human perspective in how they're surviving. So it might be a plant growing towards the sun to get more sunlight. It's going to grow that direction so that it gets more sun. So you can see there are a lot of things built into our standards to give us supports. Also, at the State Board of Education, it's not my prerogative to write curriculum. That's left up to local education agencies, so the districts and the charters. However, these are big shifts. and I really want to support you. So at the state office, I've been working to build resources that will help you as you make these shifts and help you as you think about what should I do for curriculum? And is this a good curriculum? So Ricky Scott, the secondary science specialist, and I have worked together on a lot of these resources. So you will be able to access the link to the science page, and on that link, you will find all of these resources. You'll find the seed standards. Please use our website to access them and not another website. These will be the most accurate listing of the standards. There's also professional learning or Canvas courses. There's open education resource textbooks, and there's core guides with new this year formative assessment clusters. So a little bit more in depth, the Canvas courses, there's one that's for K-12 that really looks at these shifts. There's a module for each of the shifts for engineering, so that you can really dig into that if you're interested. These are all self-paced. There's no fee. You do earn USBE credits. You can start them at any point that you want, and they're all online. So there's one that looks at the shifts in instruction, and there are also courses for each grade level that will help you build content background knowledge for what you're teaching in your science concepts for your grade. The open educational resource textbooks, they have a phenomena for every standard, and they have developmentally appropriate texts for your students that will help you as you think about what should I do for instruction, and also provide some questions that will help you and your students start thinking about the cross-cutting concepts and the practices and how we can make sense of this phenomena. So these are really good resources, and they are written in, it shows down at the bottom, all the different languages for grades 1 through 6. So dual language, it's there to support you as well. And the last resource that I wanted to share with you are the core guides. Now the core guides, they need to become like your best friend. So for every standard, it tells you what are the skills and concepts that your students should master for this standard. What's the progression? So where do they fit in the K2, 3, 5, 6, 8? Where have students come from? Where are they going? There are sentence stems and academic language for what you should be seeing as you have your students talking about these science concepts for this standard. There's phenomena, there's proficiency scales, and new this year, there are formative assessment clusters that help you see the rigor and your students see the rigor expected from these standards. And they're there for teachers to use. You can use them however you would like, but they should give you a pretty good idea of where are students, what can we do to support them so that they better understand these science concepts and can apply the cross-cutting concepts and use the practices. So I think there are some really good resources. Most of all, I want you to know that I am at the State Board of Education to support you. That is my job. You have my email. If there is something you need, please email me and I will help you find that resource, or I can point you in the right direction to who can help you. I am there for you. So I want you to know that. And really, I just wish you the very best on this exciting new venture. So I think that gives you kind of an overview for the standards. I hope you found something new that you didn't know in this short introduction. And now we have a couple of minutes for questions if anyone has a question. So I'll let Tamara kind of moderate that.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Great. And I'll ask Melissa to come back out and join me. And if you have a question for Melissa, we're going to invite you to put that into the Q&A right now. I saw 2 come in. Adam and I were sort of answering them as they came in, but I'll repeat them just in case. One was, are they different than the 3-year cohort PESTL classes?
So PESTL really looks at these 3 dimensions of science and phenomena-based in science. They do use the next generation science standards, which are like cousins to our seed standards. They're all built from that framework document that I showed you. And our seed standards relied heavily on the next generation standards as well. So there's a lot of similarities, but they're not exactly the same. But PESTL classes are awesome and wonderful.
And there's a question about getting your email. I just want to reiterate that all of this information, including Melissa's entire presentation, will be available to you in the Google folder. And I will share that link at the end of our presentation today, and also email it out to everyone. Seeing some more questions come in. They are excited about the resources at the USBE site. What Canvas course counts towards a STEM endorsement? Or would the Canvas course count towards a STEM endorsement?
No, these are merely meant as teacher resources. There are separate courses for the elementary STEM endorsement, and soon to come, the elementary science endorsement, which is new. I know that some universities are starting to pick that up as soon as January of this year.
Thank you. Here's another one. On the formative assessment clusters, is it helpful to use to match with our end of level SAGE tests?
That is an excellent question. So we all know that best teaching practice is that assessment mirrors instruction. So these do mirror the summative assessments because the summative assessments should mirror what we're doing in instruction. So the clusters start with a phenomenon. They scaffold students to gather, reason, and communicate or make sense using practices and cross-cutting concepts to then ultimately, in the end, answer this idea of what's going on in this phenomenon. What is the science concept or engineering concept at play here? So yes, they're really helpful to help you see what kind of should instruction look like. Feel free to use them in any way. They are not curriculum, but they are support.
Great. Thank you. All right. Those are the
I do see one question tomorrow in the chat that says, where can we find the core guides?
Yep.
They're on the science webpage. That link is on this PowerPoint that will be shared with you at the end of tonight. So, and it looks like Mackenzie also put it in the chat. So we're double covered.
Excellent. All right.
To everyone.
Yeah, thank you again, Melissa.
Oh, I appreciate you. Thanks, all of your teachers. Oh, I appreciate all you're doing for students. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
All right. Okay, so now we have a quick 5-minute break, and this is going to be your opportunity to gather your materials for the science workshop with Adam. And what you will need for today's workshop are bubbles, a straw, lid of some kind of container, a notebook, a pencil or a pen, and a pipe cleaner. Now, if you're some of the people on the webinar today that have picked up supplies, they will be in your supply packet, or you can just get them from what you have around at home. While people are gathering their materials, we're going to share a few brief videos for you.
Hi teachers, my name is Penny Kaywood and I am the drama and music teacher at Wasatch Elementary School in the Salt Lake City School District. I also run the youth theater program at the University of Utah.
I might write a little poem with the students, like bubble, bubble, boiling trouble, shining in the rainbow light, popping on the ground and rubble, in the air they're taking flight.
Maybe our bubble is a hula hoop and they move with it, and then when it pops, it just goes over their head.
You can also see through a bubble, so maybe it's a bigger piece of fabric with multiple students holding onto it, and maybe they're underneath it. Maybe they're inside the bubble. How do they get out?
Thanks for letting me share my ideas with you. Bye.
Great, and that was just some quick ideas on integrating drama and the idea of bubbles, and that comes to us from Penny Kaywood. All right, we have another one. This is bubbles and music. This is Bethany Struthers with the Davis School District.
Hi, my name is Bethany Struthers, and my art form is music. To explore bubbles through music, we could take music with a variety of expressive qualities, music with longer notes, shorter notes, more percussive music, more melodious music, soft, loud, fast, and slow, and invite the students to respond to the different varieties of music with a bubble wand in their hands. So dip the bubble wand, respond to the music, and see what happens with the bubbles with the different varieties of music. Do they get more bubbles or less bubbles? Do the bubbles pop more easily? Do they continue to float? And we can compare the different types of music with the response of the bubble wand and what kinds of bubbles they get. I think that could be really fun.
So some ideas from Bethany regarding bubbles and music. And now we're just going to take a few more minutes and we'll be right back with Adam Johnson and his science workshop.
All right, I think we'll get started. I am really delighted to be here. It's a little bit odd to have 100 people on the other end of the internet, perhaps looking at me, but I can't see them necessarily. So I'll do the best I can as an engaging scientist. I wanted to bring bubbles to the table, specifically because this is something I find engages everyone from preschoolers to graduate students, teachers, scientists, parents, kids. I've used them to great effect for a range of people. And I think what we tend to imagine is that bubbles are playthings and kind of fun, trivial little things that might be great for a 3-year-old. But I also find that they've got some other fantastic potential beyond the 3-year-old realm and into graduate studies in physics and a 3rd grade classroom or a physics classroom and all kinds of other possibilities. So given that you've got your bubbles, some kind of wand, the task is going to be that you in your living rooms, your classrooms, your lonely little closets, or your collective parties with your other fellow teachers, you are going to blow bubbles. And it would go something like this with a wand. I've got a pipe cleaner here that I've coiled. I've got some straws that I happen to have. I've also got my own homebrew. It's not gin, but it's my homebrewed bubble solution in an old gin bottle, just to be classy. And I happen to have pipe, and I've got my homebrew solution here. So it would go something like this, straight at the camera. Oh, that was well framed. Good job. And then I might get out my handy dandy Wonder and Notice notebook with my name on it, and I would start recording some observations. So this is your first task. All of you out there in the ether of the internet, I want you to blow bubbles, and I want you to observe and wonder, notice, wonder, and then write. What do you observe? I will give you 5 or so minutes. If there are technical difficulties, I'm monitoring the chat or yell really loud, and we'll see what happens. So go. I'll pretend like I can see you. Yes, you're doing a great job. Pace yourself for 2 more minutes. Thirty seconds. All right, scientists, as you're wrapping up, I was thinking about how there's some comment during Melissa's presentation about a little bit of maybe sadness, feeling of loss, that there isn't art in the SEED standards. And I have had the privilege of some great experiences where we've gotten to bring practices of arts in parallel with practices of the sciences. And I think what we're going to get at, and what I think is we're looking at some of the chat going on right now, that this is completely braidable, completely possible. In fact, something that we want to make happen. So we'll see how this is going. We look at the shared screen. I've got this particular Padlet. If you've not used Padlet before, welcome to the club. I've never used Padlet before. This is my first one. I'm going to take thank you, Tamara. You've already taken the link and pasted it into the chat. I also have this QR code that is sitting there on the screen. So if you're working from a phone or a tablet or something, you can just snap a picture of that. And when you go to that Padlet, you will see this particular page. And on this particular page, I have put here Act 1. I happen to have the ability to edit this. And you also have the ability to add your observations here. So I just clicked on this plus button. The subject is that puppies interact. And I might write a little bit more about how someone's dog is biting at the bubbles. And I publish that. Some of you are way ahead of me. Go ahead and contribute your observations that you've written down right into this Padlet. And go ahead and take time, if you've got a moment, to see other observations you might want to corroborate or even push back on someone else's observation. I love that even though I don't see what's happening at the bottom, I can see the scroll bar getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. Yes, I can show the QR code again. Here it is. We'll watch the assembly of Padlet observations take place. Hi, Carrie. Now let's go back to my, thanks, Tamara. Let's go back here. Some bubbles pop in the air. Some bubbles are attaching to others while others aren't. Some bubbles are bigger than others. They're small and large. Blowing differently causes different kinds of bubbles. There's window reflections. There are various rainbow colors there. I can see my reflection, but it's upside down. It's iridescent. I don't know what iridescence means, but that sounds great. Slow, silent pop and splatter. It's directional. I noticed this too, someone says. Someone's asking about tension in the bottles. They remove differently when my fan was off. Bubbles are all different sizes, tiny to really big. Puppies love bubbles, larger bubbles, bubble solutions. One is better than another. I'll be sure to share mine with you. Maybe your bubbles are old. It looks like swirls of prisms. There are colors, pink, purple. This is wonderful. Someone says pink, but someone else said rainbow. Pink is not in the rainbow, but I also saw pink. Do bubbles bounce? Some bubbles popped fast. Pipe cleaner, no good, didn't work for me. Different pipe cleaners might work a little bit differently. Light reflects off the bubbles. This is fantastic. Let me scroll down to get another random. I saw pink and green reflections, but couldn't find the light source. Oh, wonderful. How do I make cube bubbles? Good wonder. I blew slowly. The bubbles were big, fewer in number. They're spherical. Huh. Bubbles are always moving. Reflected light. Pipe cleaner didn't work so well. The straw was best. Who knew you could use a straw? Patience. This goes on and on and on and on and on. Smaller bubbles stay aloft longer. Never would have imagined. Great. Usually I'd have you do this for about 20 minutes. We're on hyper pace. So I want to move on to Act 2. And in Act 2, you may still be adding some. I want you to read something. It's like worst art workshop ever. Johnston's making us read something. I'll put it in the chat. I will also share on the screen this particular reading. Which hopefully is right here. For a little bit of background, if you've pulled this up and have started reading, this is written by a guy, Samuel Scudder. He goes to graduate school in the late 1800s. He works for this guy named Agassiz, and Agassiz says, oh, so you want to study bugs? Here, look at this fish. That's just the kind of jerk Agassiz was. There's a mountain in Uintas named after Agassiz. It's overlooking a lake named after Scudder, which I quite love. As you're reading it, or if you can't see it for any reason, I'll read it out loud. Agassiz says to Scudder, take this fish, look at it, we call it the hemulon. By and by, I will ask you what you have seen. With that, he left me. In 10 minutes, I had seen all that could be seen in that fish and started in search of the professor who had, however, left the museum. Nothing was to be done but return to a steadfast gaze at my mute companion. Half an hour passed, an hour, another hour. The fish began to look loathsome. He goes on. On my return, I learned that Professor Agassiz had been at the museum, but had gone and would not return for several hours. So slowly I drew forth that hideous fish, and with a feeling of desperation again looked at it. I might not use a magnifying glass. Instruments of all kind were interdicted. My two hands, my two eyes, and the fish, it seemed a most limited field. I pushed my fingers down its throat to see how sharp its teeth were. I began to count the scales in the different rows until I was convinced that that was nonsense. At last, a happy thought struck me. I would draw the fish. And now with surprise, I began to discover new features in this creature. Just then, the professor returned. That is right, he said. A pencil is one of the best eyes. He goes on. You have not looked very carefully. Why? You haven't even seen the most conspicuous feature of the animal, which is plainly before your eyes as the fish itself. Look again. And he left me to my misery. I was piqued. I was mortified, still more of that wretched fish. But now I set myself to the task with a will and discovered one new thing after another until I saw how just the professor's criticism had been. The afternoon passed quickly, and when towards its close, the professor inquired, do you see it yet? No, I'm certain I don't, but I see how little I saw before. Agassiz gives him some encouragement. He says, I'll see you in the morning. This was disconcerting. I walked home by the Charles River in a distracted state. The cordial greeting from the professor the next morning was reassuring. Here was a man who seemed to be quite as anxious that I should see for myself what he saw. Do you perhaps mean, I asked, that the fish has symmetrical sides with paired organs? In other words, it looks the same left and right? He is thoroughly pleased, of course, repaid the wakeful hours of the previous night. After he had discoursed most happily and enthusiastically, as he always did, upon the importance of this point, I ventured to ask what I should do next. Oh, look at your fish, he said, and left me again to my own devices. This goes on until Scudder admits or suggests this is the best science lesson he ever had, observing a fish for days on end when he in fact came to school to be an entomologist. I'll let you pause on that for a few moments more. But essentially, I'm going to be your Agassiz. I like to think in life I'm not as big a jerk as he actually was. But in this case, I'm going to be just that much of a awful scientist, not like the scientists here at Weber State, but like this guy at Harvard. And I'm going to tell you that you need to now get out your bubbles again. Get out the bubbles, blow the bubbles, but now think in terms of what Scudder learned. How do you change your observations and what will they be like? You've got your handy dandy notebook. You've got the bubbles themselves. You've got other tools, perhaps. Puppies in residence, pencils, fingers. Go. If you were here in person, you'd be staring blankly back at me like, really? So that's what I'm imagining you doing right now. And I'm reassuring you, yes, blow the bubbles some more. I'll see you in a few minutes. pace yourself for 90 more seconds. All right, scientists. As you can probably imagine, we want to document this. So since we're not all together in the same room, we don't have a shared whiteboard, but we do have a shared Padlet. So here's the QR code once again. The Padlet link is the same. I'm thinking tomorrow we'll be pasting that into the chat. And then you can return here to hit the add button under Act 2 and see what new things, additional things you have found. If you want, if you've got a spare hand as you're typing with your right hand into the Padlet, if you want to add to the chat, this is not a requirement for everyone. Michelle, I'll put the QR code up again. If you've got any insight into how your observations have changed, go ahead and throw that in the chat to everyone. And I'm just looking over the Padlet now. There's movements, there's growing and deflating, gravity. What a wonderful thing to observe that we take for granted. Looking at the longevity of bubbles, pipe cleaner is like a firework. It begins as a circle, bursts into many small bubbles. Oh, that's cool. More solution, denser bubbles. Notice 2 reflections instead of 1 at the start. Splatter patterns. That's lovely. Breathe fleeting life into the bubbles. Bubbles are so relaxing. Bouncing bubbles. More to see with the colors. This is wonderful. I love the fact that I've got this documented now. This is a great advantage over whiteboards that are going to get erased after a lab. And in the chat, people are talking about slowing down, about thinking about what they were doing in different ways. Thinking that about things that weren't so obvious, but I think there's also the counter to that. People are pointing out stuff that is obvious, that symmetry of the fish left and right, as well as, you know, the idea that the bubbles are spherical. Like, we blow bubbles for a long time. I have scientists blowing bubbles and they never catch the fact that they're spherical or don't think to point that out. But here we're making that case in these observations, using more time for the observation. And then there's these other wonderings about, if there weren't gravity, what would happen? Is there anything else that could happen. People are using their phones. I'm assuming that's what we take pictures with. Scudder used a pencil. And I suspect if you had more time, you'd pull out the pencil, start to sketch things. Maybe, still life with a bubble. Thinking about this just a little bit more. So let me move us forward just another step. That was Act 2. In Act 3, I will paste this into the chat, but I'll show it to you in all of its glory right here on the screen. This next piece, if you're not into poetry, but just wish you had some entryway into poetry, and who doesn't, I'd recommend Billy Collins. He's a very approachable poet, well-known poet, poet laureate for a couple of years for the United States. He also observes a fish about 100 years after Scudder, and he also writes about observing the fish. It goes like this. As soon as the elderly waiter placed before me the fish I had ordered, it began to stare up at me with its one flat, iridescent eye. I feel sorry for you, it seemed to say. Eating alone in this awful restaurant, bathed in such unkindly light, and surrounded by those dreadful murals of Sicily. And I feel sorry for you too, yanked from the sea and now lying dead next to some boiled potatoes in Pittsburgh, I said back to the fish as I raised my fork. And thus my dinner in an unfamiliar city with its rivers and lighted bridges was graced not only with chilled wine and lemon slices, but with compassion and sorrow. Even after the waiter removed my plate with the head of the fish still staring and the barrel vault of its delicate bones terribly exposed, save for a shroud of parsley. If we were all together in one place, we'd have this moment of contemplation, and then we'd talk a little bit about what on earth is Collins doing? What on earth is the point of the poet or of poetry? This is an interesting question to ask a bunch of physics graduate students. Takes them a second. Here with a bunch of art educators or art willing art participants, you might have this might be easier to take on. But it makes sense that we need poetry in our lives, like we need music, like we need painting, like we need lots of different things. Because as Melissa's saying in the chat, it adds some kind of personification. It adds some kind of empathy. It adds some kind of metaphor, some kind of analogical thinking, or relationships, Aaron is suggesting. All of these things are taking place. This is not what Scudder was doing. I mean, he was disgusted by the fish. He was upset with his task. There's, when I show you the unabridged version, he has the formaldehyde. It's just an awful, awful affair. But he's just trying to get the observations done, trying to do this as scientifically as possible. Collins is doing something much different. So that's what we will do. Act 3, Scene 2, go back to the Padlet. The QR code is the same, the link is the same. Tomorrow we'll paste that back into the chat, so we've got it up front. And then, oh, I'm sorry, yes, I'm accelerating this a little bit. You can be jotting down notes, but I suspect now that you've got a sense for where this is all going, jot notes and also jot them into the Padlet as you're observing the bubbles. Just makes sense. I'll just go ahead and say Act 3. Collins observations. How do you observe the bubble as a poet? I don't expect this to start filling in right away. Someone asked, can we? Of course you can. I mean, just whatever it is you're asking, can we do such a thing? Just be safe and make sure you have a fire extinguisher nearby if that's necessary. Otherwise, fine, do that thing. But take on the lens of a poet, take on the lens of an artist. What do you see now? Start re-blowing the bubbles, retaking notes, and as you get there, contribute to the Padlet. We'll go ahead and let this take 5 minutes or so in total. We'll watch this assemble. Some of my students, as you're doing this, they start to freak out and they ask, you mean you want us to write a poem? No, but if you've got one that this inspires, great. I'm watching the Padlet populate. In another 30 seconds. I'll start to talk about that a little bit more, but don't let me stop you from your additions or other observations. Okay, as you're continuing, I hope, if you're on the same part of the Padlet that I am, you see things like joyful and euphoric and magnificent and transforming and simple and fleeting, childhood, fragile, billowy. These are, I'm sure you could find ways to use these kinds of descriptions, these kinds of adverbials in a scientific kind of outlet. Like we often would need that level of description, but this isn't the immediate thing that comes to mind. And especially these kind of emotive things about something being fleeting, something being euphoric, something being joyful, something being temporary, that would mean something. Breathless. There was a sense in a previous one about the idea of you being part of the bubble and the bubble being part of you. That's not going in a scientific journal, and that's fine, but it certainly needs to have its place. Spatter on my note. This looks like a lovely poem that we get to capture here. Whimsical, temporary, joy, wonder. Some of you are rediscovering your lost childhood. I'm glad that maybe we had a moment where we could give that back to you. Awesome. What's that called when you have the poem with the beginnings of each? Is that an acrostic? I don't know. I'm out of my element. All kinds of things here. I want to make it really clear that I don't expect you to take this and say this is science. And I don't expect anyone to take the scientific things and say this is arts. Yet, the things that we do in the scientific fields, the things that we do in the arts fields are going to be parallel and complementary. And they can braid in and out of one another. I did work with Eric Stern in dance that some of you are familiar with, where we were doing choreography, which we liken to engineering. We're doing scientific work and observations, phenomena on the dance stage. And we're doing artistic work that contributed to our ideas about science. Like these things braided together really, really well. And some of those who are my favorite scientists in the world, or some of the best scientists in the world, have a really strong artistic presence within them. They honor that, they nurture that. And I want to make sure that this is something that we continue to emphasize in all that we do in education. People went ahead and saw that my postscript, I said, what is most learningful about this? I'd like to think that learningful is a word that I made up, but everyone knows what it means as soon as we see it. What kinds of things do we take away from this? And if you have, I'm sorry, whoever is a bubble ready to pop. I mean, I guess that could be good. If you've got other things you want to add to this later on, I'd welcome it. At some point, I'll have to turn it off. But I'll let that keep going while we go back to kind of some concluding remarks. Oops. I'll put a link to this in your final materials, but just to give you a sense of what it's all about. I went off and videotaped scientists blowing bubbles, just like you're blowing bubbles. And I want to tell you, this is one of the most important scientific contributions, scholarly contributions I've given to the field. Watching a solid state physicist blowing a bubble here. And you can see she's, I'm trying to scroll through this rather than, yeah, if I catch her right at the right moment, she's like laughing, smiling, having a wonderful time. And she's saying things like, I wonder what makes them small. I wonder what makes them big. This is a solid state physicist who designs solar panels, basically. Further on, this is Bridget Hilbig. She studies mushrooms, botany, remediation with mushrooms. She's blowing the bubbles and she's catching them on the pipe and on the straw. We've got, besides Bridget, this guy here, Brandon Burnett. He's a material scientist, chemist. He had just shaved his beard and his mustache because he dressed up as Ted Lasso for Halloween and looked incredible. But here he's literally spilling the bubbles on his desk to play with them. I offered for all these people that I could clean up after them and say, no, this is great. They're spilling it all over all their stuff. So I'll leave you with the link to this and you can go, feel free to show this to your students. It's 10 minutes of these 5 different 10 minutes total, 5 different scientists blowing bubbles. And I guarantee they're doing the same things that your third graders are doing, same things that you're doing, and they're all research scientists. The other thing I'll leave you with is that for me, even though I've done this dozens of times, maybe 100 times, I've done this in various settings, this has never gotten old. And I guarantee that every time I do this, I now know that this is always going to provide something new that I've never seen before. And in your observations, you're pointing out stuff that I had never seen before. I lose track. There's always something new. And I like to show this image as a final takeaway. This is a young woman in our program Science in the Parks several years ago now, who is holding a bubble in her hands with our great bubble solution. I promise I will give you the recipe to this. But I can stare at this for hours on end, seeing the multiple reflections, seeing the reflections of her fingers, seeing the iridescence, that pink, blue, turquoisey combination of colors, the fact that I can see through it, the fact that I can see my own fingers right here reflected in the bubble. I'm holding a camera. Those are my feet there, but these reflections are of her finger. And at the same time, I can see through this whole thing, and she's holding the thing. This is amazing. That's what I'll leave you with, is that there's nothing to be taken for granted, that this is a scientific pursuit, and you could get your PhD in materials science by studying bubbles. I'm quite confident, and still have a complete career in front of you to finish with the bubbles. So I'll leave you with that. I'll turn it over to Tamara for a break and the introduction, the segue into the next section. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. All right, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break again to get ready for the visual art workshop portion of tonight's webinar. And here are the materials that you will need for that. Some clear nail polish, a pie pan, some kind of shallow dish or container that can hold water. You're going to want to make sure that you fill that dish with about 1 inch of water. You're going to need some black construction paper or cardstock cut into small pieces that should be able to sit flat at the bottom of the shallow dish. Toothpicks, a white gel pen, and the color photo of the Celebes rainbow fish. I will put that link into the chat in case you want to go and take a look at that. I'll do that right now. That's the link to the image. If you had a supply packet, it came with that. All right. And just like last time, as you're gathering materials, we have 2 more quick videos to share with you. This one comes from Kelly Bruce Glenn, and it's integrating bubbles and dance.
Hello, I'm Kelly Bruce Glenn, and I'm here to talk to you about how dance can be incorporated into observations about bubbles. One of the elements of dance is energy. Energy is about how the movement happens. We can use our observations about bubbles and their movement qualities to translate to our own bodies. Bubbles may be light or gentle, sustained or soft, or with other elements around us, we could see some sudden movements. Careful, you might see a sharp pop if the elements get too rough around us. Use movement as a way to explore how bubbles move through space, but also watch other dancers. What energy, qualities, and adjectives do you see in other dancers? How is that the same or different from the bubbles you observed? Remember, movement doesn't always have to be full body. It can just be in your arms, your shoulders, your head, or any other body part. Don't be afraid to start small and scale up for students to feel more comfortable with movement. Thanks for watching and happy dancing.
And that comes to us from Kelly Bruce Glenn, the Utah State Board of Education.
Hi, my name is Alisa. I'm a BTS art specialist and visual art teacher for Paiute School District. I love bubbles. They are so much fun because they are an impermanent lightweight container that can take forms and shapes. I would have students use a pipe cleaner to make some sort of shape or form, maybe a star, triangle, cone, a cloud, a square, etc. We would have a discussion on the differences between organic and geometric shapes and forms, and then we would blow the bubbles and talk about how a bubble changes from the wand form or shape to a sphere. We would talk about why this happens. It's because the surface tension of the soap and the water pull inward. We would talk about the transitional phase from wand form or shape to the sphere, and the time it takes for the change, and how we can represent those changes by making a small flip book of the change. You could also incorporate a really easy value study with this.
Great. So we're just going to take another quick couple of minutes and we'll be right back with Alisa Petersen. Great, and now we are ready to switch over to Alisa Petersen, who will give us a visual art workshop on the art of iridescence.
Hey everybody, so I need to apologize before I start. The fan on my computer will not stop running, so I hope that you can hear me. I hope that eventually the fan turns off, but I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I have packed maybe even too much into what we're going to do in the time that we have, but I'm really excited to get started. Okay, so I'm just going to dive right in. When I was thinking about this workshop, I was so excited because I was thinking about, as I talked to Adam and Melissa and Tamara, we kept talking about how there are certain things in art and in the sciences that you just do them in both. And we talked about this idea of notice and wonder and create. And I kind of threw the word experiment in there as well. And I feel that scientists and engineers and artists are doing this all the time as we go through our processes. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of how I've done that to prepare for this workshop, and then how we can do that with our students as well. So when I was thinking about bubbles, and I took a moment months ago to look at bubbles and think, what am I going to do with this workshop? I noticed the colors that so many of you talked about during Adam's presentation. And I noticed that they were really kind of rainbow, but we could see some pinks and some purples and different colors. And I thought, what does this mean? What is the rainbow effect that sometimes we see on things, or almost like they're in things? And so this led me to start just a rabbit hole searching for other things that occur naturally that have that kind of rainbow. So I found bubbles, like we talked about already, and feathers, and shells, and beetles, and insect wings, and even oil on water. And so then I had a thought that maybe that meant that was iridescence. I've heard that word before, but I realized that I had a big hole in my knowledge. So that pushed me to do some research and to do, well, not personal research, but just to read and look and see what I can discover. And what I found after lots of reading is that it is called iridescence, and that's the phenomenon of certain surfaces that appear to gradually change color as the angle of the view, so the angle that we're viewing it from, or the angle of illumination changes. So when something looks rainbowy, and that rainbowness can sort of change as the light or our angle seeing it changes. And that's cool, but I thought a snake skin, or the surface of a seashell, or oil on water, or a bubble, they all are so different. How could they all be the same thing? How could they all be iridescent? And so then hours and hours and hours of reading, I found even more information, which was fun. And my family's been hearing me talk about this for so long, because it really got me so excited to learn, which I think is what we want our students to do as well. And so how does it happen? It's something called optical interference. I hear someone says I sound great, which is great because my fan is so loud, but optical interference, and that has so many things to do with like butterfly wings or thicknesses of films. There are so many ways that you can have optical interference, but it's basically the structure of the thing that you're looking at has something, changes the light that we see, and that changes the color that we see. And there's so many different ways that it works, which is really pretty interesting. But basically the structure, rather than having a pigment or something, it's the surface of it changes the color that we see, which was super cool to learn about for myself. So looking at bubbles caused me to wonder, to find out more about iridescence and how it works. But then I thought, how could I do a project about this? So then I went to the internet and found tons and tons of ideas. And I wondered, could I capture that rainbow quality of iridescence and use that to make art in some way? So I found something. I'm going to see if you guys can hear my sound. Okay, I have a little video to show you, and this is going to demonstrate a process, and I'm showing it to you a little early on so that you can work on doing this yourself while I show you a few other things in just a moment. Before I start, I do have to say that rainbow paper and this iridescent or sort of shiny rainbow paper is incredibly difficult to film. So pardon my, tried to catch it. Let's see what happens. I'm going to show you how to make rainbow paper that is glittery and metallic and just beautiful. For this project, you'll need a paper towel, some toothpicks, black paper, clear nail polish, a shallow container, and water. Pour about 1 inch of water into the container. Then slide a piece of black paper into the water. You want to make sure it goes right down to the bottom. Now pour 1 drop of clear nail polish onto the surface of the water. Wait and watch as the drop spreads out to create a thin film on the water. Sometimes the drop will spread really fast, almost immediately. Other times it's a little bit slower to spread out. If the polish accidentally lands on the paper, then it won't spread out and create that film. You can just throw that paper out and start again, or try to add another drip and see if it will spread. If your polish did spread out, then you can spread it even farther by moving it around with a toothpick. But if you're not fast enough or you move the film around too much, it will sort of get solid and just break up into pieces and it won't stick on your paper anymore. In this case, you can just use your toothpick to sort of gather up all the little bits and pieces and then try again. When you're finished moving the polish around, you can lift the paper and the film out together. At this point, that film is just kind of floating on top of your wet paper, but as it dries, it will stick to the paper and become permanent. I really love this part of the process because you get to see what you captured on the paper. Be sure to protect your work surface with a paper towel or a piece of newspaper or recycled paper. Black paper has a tendency to bleed when it's wet, and if you're not careful, you'll get a stained table. Now that you know this simple process, have fun making your own rainbow paper. Okay, so I'm going to pause for just a little bit, and I want you to get your supplies out and start this process. Remember, put a piece of paper towel, or you can even use some scrap paper down to catch the, or to act as a protection for your table for the wet paper. But go ahead and hopefully you gathered some water before we started. Put water in that black container. And then remember, slide 1 little piece of paper inside, pour a drop of nail polish right onto the surface of the water. Watch to see it spread out because it will just spread, which is cool. And then you can lift the paper back out. And as you do it, you want to capture that rainbowy film on your paper. Then set it aside to dry. So while you're doing that, you'll find that sometimes you get great results and sometimes you don't. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. But what I'd love to have you do is scan this QR code to go to the visual art Padlet. It will look just like the one that Adam used, but it's going to be fresh and new. And I'd like you to snap a picture of what you create and upload it into the first column on the left. And what I found is Tamara just put the link into the chat so that you can go there and see what people are putting. But I found that I like to use Padlet on my phone for taking a photo. So now when I did this, I found that when you scan that QR code, you'll go to a website. You don't have to have any app or software installed on your phone or tablet. And in that, when you press plus and go to make a post, you can have the option of taking a photo or choosing a photo from your camera roll. For me, when I tried to take a photo right there in the website, it would crash. But if I took a picture first and then went to that QR code, then it was really easy for me to upload my images. So I'm hoping that you guys are creating a few pieces of rainbow paper. I can't remember how many pieces of black paper are in your box, but just use all of the ones that are blank and experiment with that. What I wanted to say next, though, I'm going to go ahead and move on from this image. We're going to go look at the Padlet in a few minutes, but I wanted to show you another thing. When I first thought of this idea, it seemed like the perfect choice. And I would say for a solid week, I couldn't get it to work. I was really disappointed and I thought I wouldn't be able to use this at all. And so I have a little video that I'll just play while you guys are working to see how it worked for me at the very beginning. So here we go. Failures with rainbow paper.
Failures with rainbow paper. The first instructions I saw for this process said to put the nail polish onto the surface of the water first, then press the paper onto it. But that made pretty terrible results. My results were bad over and over again. Here are a few of my really bad results. I thought I was going to have to totally scrap this idea. No matter what I tried, it just didn't work. Eventually, I decided to try getting the paper wet first. Then I would drop the polish onto the water and dip the paper into it, but I still wasn't getting great results. This was the result of that idea. It was getting closer, but still not there yet. I finally realized that what I needed to do was drop the paper into the water first, then put the polish on top and pull the paper out through that film of polish. I finally had the results that I was hoping for.
So what I want to do next, just really quickly, is take a look at the Padlet and see if anyone has shared their images with us yet. Oh, we're getting some great pictures here now. Can you guys see my Padlet? I'm going to hope, I think that you can. Oh, I love seeing what people are making. What's cool is that oh, beautiful. Depending on where that film is on the paper, you just catch different things. It can look so different. Oh, I like that. So cool. Absolutely so cool. And I love those colors. What's really interesting is while the paper's wet, you'll get a certain effect and then it changes when it dries. But I found, so this one down at the very bottom is mine that was dry. And the ones we're seeing here above that you guys have submitted are still wet. It's shiny in a different way, but it stays shiny even when it dries. And it's just fantastic. Okay, I'm gonna jump back out of the Padlet. Oh, I love that one at the top. Oop, that's the wrong direction. There we go. Okay, so when I did this, I really started thinking about how I felt like my process to make this paper was a failure until I stuck with it and tried a lot of different things. And I got it to where it would work great. And I would be ready to take it to use with some kids. And I realized that when I'm creating a project or a process that I want to use in an art classroom, this is what I do every time. I try 1 million things. I try out lots of things, lots of materials, lots of different techniques until I find what I think will be successful every time for my students. And then I present it to my students. But I'm realizing that when I do that, I'm hiding the process from them. And so I'm kind of withholding some learning. And so I looked quite a bit, and planning and carrying out investigations with art materials and processes aligns really well with the science and engineering practices that Melissa told us about in the SEED standards, and with several of the standards in the CREATE strand of the visual arts, Utah Visual Arts Standards. And I have a handout where I've kind of listed the visual art ones that you would be surprised. I would say half or more of those CREATE standards are about experimenting with your materials, getting to know your materials as you plan a project, which is super cool. So when I allow my students to engage in this type of experimentation, they begin to think like artists and scientists and engineers. So I just created a really fast, this is a front and back template to do the scientific method with art supplies. And I filled this out with my son, who's 10 years old. His name is Max. And my observation was that the fingernail polish spreads out on the surface of water, and I can capture it on the black paper to make rainbow paper. But my question is, what would happen if I changed the temperature of the water? And my hypothesis, or I guessed, that the colors would swirl more. I have a little video to show you what happened. You can see I've captured all of my notes here, but we'll just take a look at the video so I can show you what really happened.
This is one example of how to experiment with rainbow paper. My question is, what will happen if I change the temperature of the water? My hypothesis is that I think the colors will swirl more in hot water than in cold water. First, I tried using hot water, which was about 160 degrees. When I added a drop of nail polish, I noticed that it spread out, but it kind of stayed in this circle shape. Even when I picked it up on the paper, the shape stayed quite round. Notice the circle shape again, and that once the polish spread out a little bit, it just stopped and wouldn't spread out farther. And then when I lift the paper out, you can see that circle remains, especially right in the middle. So my observations for the hot water was that there was a prominent circle in the middle of the design. There were narrow rainbow stripes along the edges, and the colors just did not really spread very far. When the paper dried, I noticed that the polish in the center of the circle was more shiny than the rest of the page, so I rubbed it with my finger, and the polish rubbed right off. It was not stuck to the page at all. Next, I tried warm water, which was about 83 degrees. This time, the nail polish seemed to spread out much faster than the last time. I also noticed that I could see stripes of color throughout the nail polish. And when I lifted out the paper, those stripes were captured there. So my observations were that I could see stripes of color, and I did not see that solid circle in the middle of the color. I also noticed that the stripes mostly seem to follow rainbow color order. So I can see pink and orange, yellow, green, teal, blue, purple, and then it would go back to pink again. Finally, I noticed that when the stripes were not quite as wide, I could not see all of those colors. And when the paper dried, I couldn't rub away the color. It seemed to really stick to the paper. Finally, I used cold water, which was about 52 degrees. When I added the drop of polish, I noticed that it spread really quickly, and it looked like it just kept moving the whole time. Then when I pulled the paper out, I noticed that the colors were spread out really well. Here's another example. Look at how the colors have spread so far that the stripes almost don't look like stripes anymore in the center. One more thing that I saw was that as I would remove the paper, the nail polish would continue to flow out across the water so that I would have a lot to clean up at the end. With the cold water paper, I noticed that the stripes were less apparent and the colors looked much more fuzzy. But I did see that there were often very narrow stripes right along the edges of the color. Finally, I noticed that the colors of the cold water paper seemed to be the most vibrant of all of the temperatures. And when the paper was dry, the color would not rub off. I originally thought that the colors would swirl more in hot water than in cold water. But what I found is that the temperature did not make the colors swirl more or less. The nail polish spread out more in cold water and less in hot water. And when the nail polish spread out more, the stripes grew wider and less distinct. My next step is to iterate. I think about what questions I have now and what I should experiment with next. This is one.
Okay, so I'm going to look at the Padlet. I'd hope to see more pictures of your rainbow paper, but I also am wondering what other variables can you think of that students could experiment with in this process? When I did this, I just thought, oh, I wonder if I'll even see any differences in the temperatures. And the differences were like striking, and they were not what I expected. So it was really, really fun. And as I finished doing this, I could think of 20 more questions that I really wanted to try. And I haven't tried them, but I want to, like, a lot. And so let's see, what questions do you have that kids could experiment with in this process? Let me see if I can get to the right place. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so color of the paper, right? And I saw someone in the chat said they used some of their own paper that was colorful. Different brands of nail polish. I did that actually, and I had a really expensive one, and then this is the $1 kind that we special ordered from the dollar store. Same, it worked the same, which was so cool. But that would be fun to have the children experiment with. Different liquid or different liquids, hardnesses of water. That's so cool. More than one drop of nail polish. Acid, base, and neutral solvents, different colors of polish. I wondered if that would work. Different types of paper, right? And I think most of your kits should have construction paper and cardstock. I noticed that some of them didn't, and I apologize. But yeah, they look different and they react differently. Or poster board, that could be really cool. Okay, I'd love to see more ideas that you could do for, remember on the far left, that's where I want images. And then the second column is what ideas. Dish soap added. Oh, cool. I wondered about that. If you put drops of soap or drops of oil, or if some of my bubble solution accidentally got into my water, what would happen there? One thing that I really thought about, folded paper. That's cool. When I did mine, was I thought about how I had to really construct my experiment so it would be the same every time. So on my steps of my experiment, I wrote down that I would put the paper in, put the drop, count to 10, and pull the paper out. And that I wouldn't move the polish around or swirl it in any way. I would just count to 10 and pull it right out. Water level, absolutely. Moving the water as you add the nail polish. Oh, I haven't tried that. That's a great idea. It's exciting to me. And I've made rainbow paper probably 20 times since June, and my family rolls their eyes, but I want to go home and make some more tonight because it's so cool. It's really exciting. I did try big, using maybe full size sheet of paper. And what I found when I lifted it out is that the film would break, kind of get these crack marks in it. And I would think that it was ruined, but you know what? It dried amazing, just so beautiful. So that could be fun. Oh, a second dip. That's very cool. I saw someone online who did this with black sandpaper, which was awesome. And I mean, I don't have any black sandpaper. I don't know where to get it, but it was so cool. Okay, so let me go back to my slideshow and we'll go on just a little bit. I was rushing because I had the time wrong, and I realized we have plenty of time left, which is fantastic. So we're gonna just keep going a little bit more. Okay, so at the very beginning, I said that we're going to notice and wonder, and then experiment, and then create. And so before we dive into create, I did want to say that I would do this project where you have students experimenting with their materials. I'd probably spend one class period teaching them the process, just regular. And then think of those questions, have students work in teams, maybe at a table, to come up with their own question, their own experiment steps, their hypothesis, what variables they're going to try. And then the next class period, they can try it. The cool thing about this rainbow paper is it's so fast. You could do the whole experiment in 20 minutes and then have students present that back to the class. I think it would be amazing to have this group that did temperature, and this group did kinds of paper, and this group did, something else. And as they're sharing their information, I can only imagine that they would say, oh, what if we combined temperature with different textures of paper? And I wonder what would happen then. I think that would only add to more and more wonder and curiosity and excitement and investigation. Okay, so now we're going to use it. What I kind of liked about this project is rainbow paper is not your work of art. It's your art supply. So we did all this experimenting to make the thing that we're going to use to make art. So now I've put 2 pieces in your box that are finished. You can just play around with those. I have a white pen, but if you have other things at your house that you want to use, you can do that too. But I'd like you to make something. So I put a picture of a rainbow fish in your box. It's not the same fish from the story that Adam shared. I wanted to use that one, but it wasn't quite as rainbowy as I wanted. So I used this rainbow fish instead. You could just draw that on your rainbow paper with a white pen or a colored pencil or anything. You can cut it out or leave it how it is, but you could do a lot of other things. So as you're working, I have 2 more questions for Padlet. One is, how might you use this in your classroom? What could you use it for? And the other one is, as you create something, they're just tiny, but so create something awesome, upload pictures. I'd love to see what you make. Same Padlet, but let's go ahead and I'll show you a few ideas. These are some things that were created by my friend Kirsten Anderson. She's a participant with us tonight, I think, and she teaches visual art at Enoch Elementary School. And I really love this idea. She said it looks like a topographic map. So kids could find landforms and turn it into a map, and especially if they were talking about, you know, what's a cape, what's a peninsula? Can you find those within your paper and make a map? And then this little, using it as a cover for handbound book was really beautiful as well. One thing I found is that the color doesn't rub off very well of the paper. And so I think it can stand up to the stress of turning it into a book. So here are 2 others. She said use it as an illustration to go along with this. It's a poem about a bubble, or here she used it as a kind of a silhouette art project along with a personal poem, which was pretty cool. And then this next page is some pictures that I created. This is a 3D beetle that's kind of reminiscent of a scarab or iridescent beetle, or a feather. Here I did just, you could do pretend money or any kind of collage just as an element within that collage. And in this one, I cut out a bunch of circles. You could do a punch. And I think this is a project many people have done where we talk about fractions with our circles, or symmetry, or even just shapes. You could even take this and count up how many quarters you have and how many halves you have and add up how many total circles you have. But you can do it in a beautiful way with rainbow paper. And then the next idea is one that I saw online. I added this to my slideshow today because it was amazing. This is someone who used these feathers or scales are made with black sandpaper. I also wondered if you could use tar paper that you buy in a big roll at a hardware store. And then they cut it all up and used it to kind of clad this mask that they could put over their head. I just thought that was so amazing. Okay. So I'm going to go back to Padlet and see if anyone has added any cool ideas for us. Sorry. There we go. Okay. So how could you use it in your classroom? Science, art, and tie into ELA, rainbow fish, right, with a book, and you could write a piece about that. Art activism, ocean animals affected by oil spills. What a great idea. Butterfly wings, absolutely. I would use this to make different types of flowers. We could have a discussion or research project about things found in nature that are iridescent. And then they could use that paper as part of their research, which is cool. Topographic map or a treasure map at the bottom of an ocean. Write letters to classmates on rainbow paper. And you know what? I love the white pen. I actually bought a different brand that worked terribly, but I think that this jelly pen just works. I can't tell where my thing is. It shows up really great, but I also know that a white colored pencil works really well as well. Someone has experimented with rainbow paper. Awesome. Oh, making flies out of those materials. Absolutely super fun for the wings. A backdrop for a constellation or a nebula right in space. Love notes. I love it. Okay. So if you make something that you would want to photograph and share with us, I'd love to see that in this final column. But I'm going to jump back to the slideshow. So remember, we talked about noticing, wondering, experimenting, and creating. So artists and scientists systematically gain and share knowledge. So they do it through steps, through a process. Artists can do that as well, as we experiment with our materials, as we think through what can I use that will most clearly show or share the ideas I want to share with others. We practice and we try to, I think, gain knowledge about the materials or the things that we want to represent. And then artists and engineers apply that knowledge to create new solutions that contribute to society. So I'm going to show you a couple of things that I found as I was exploring the internet about how people used iridescence to do lots of things. The first are some things that were made by engineers. This one is remarkable. This is a tiny, tiny little chip, like a microchip, and you can put a little drop of blood on it. And based on the properties in blood, it kind of travels through this this thing right here, and the colors that show up based on the structure of the properties of your blood can detect breast cancer at really early stages. They said that this is so cool, it may actually replace mammograms, and mammograms would kind of be used as a follow-up procedure after this shows that we may have breast cancer. They said that the people are working on doing this for other types of cancer as well. Just the tiniest little drop of blood. This is another thing, iridescent inks or printing processes. Oftentimes these are used in security documents to make sure that they can't be counterfeit. And so we have money and passports and credit cards that have iridescent components. And this one is really cool. You might look at that picture and say that blue is not iridescent. But remember I said that the iridescence is caused by the structure or the surface of the object and the way the light is reacting to that. Well, butterflies are, some types of butterflies are iridescent, and they have all of these little tiny kind of like, feathers isn't the right word, but little, I don't know, I can't think of the word, but the structure of their wings helps us see the color. And as they move, scales, that's the word I was looking for, as they move, you can see different colors. Well, some people have created paints. They actually aren't even calling it paint. They're calling it kind of a structural coating. It goes on white, and as it settles down, those little tiny scales within the polymer settle and show you back a certain color. And they say that it's pigment free. It's all about the structure of the materials. It's incredibly hard and solid, and less bad for the environment and less toxic for humans because there's no pigment. So this is a really interesting technology. Before I jump into art, I want to tell you a few other things that I saw. There was a kind of building wrap that some people designed that had the structural color or iridescence. And if the building was damaged in an earthquake and there were micro fractures that you couldn't see, the structure of the wrap around the building would change, and it would make a different color so that you could see with your eye that damage that's happened to the building early enough that you can, repair it before it causes a problem, which is pretty cool. And one more thing, about 10 years ago, a company was designing a kind of screen that is similar to how Kindles work. They don't have any light that shines out at us like our phones and tablets do, but there are all these tiny particles in the surface of the screen that would move and change to show different colors. And so even without a light turned on, if the sun was shining on it, you could see full color screens like Kindle. It was really exciting. It was going to be the new color digital screen, but that company went bankrupt. And I don't know if it was because they had problems within the company or what, but technology kind of went in a different direction, and that did not go anywhere. But let's look at how artists have used iridescence. We have fashion, and we have architecture and interior design and small art. What I see in a lot of these is that there are materials created that light can pass through. So not just sitting on the surface, but light can pass through it. That's made with a lot of films that work in the same way that bubbles do, that the light's interacting with that film. In fact, 3M, the company 3M, that makes tape and stuff, they created a kind of iridescent film, and they actually contacted a lot of artists to create big public art, kind of like this, that used their films to kind of advertise these new materials that they were creating. And so I feel like in those cases, we're seeing exactly how the engineers who work at these companies to create the materials then go to the artists and say, use something with the material that we created. And when we do a process like we just talked about with the experimenting with our art supplies, we're letting children do that as well. Let's look at iridescence. Let's learn how to make it. Let's experiment to see what else, or what other kind of techniques we can, or results we can get with those experiments. And then let's use them for something beautiful. So I'm going to go back to the Padlet and see what some of the things are that you guys have created. Oh, good. We're getting in some pictures. I can kind of click on it and make it bigger. I don't know if you guys can see that. It looks like a little bit of folded paper. It's awesome. And this fish, which is just cool. I love it. When we were preparing for this workshop, I was telling Adam that oftentimes in my elementary art classes, I would have my students observe something from nature. Oh, it says that my screen is paused, my screen sharing. So let's see if I can, I'm going to stop my share and then start it again because I think that it wasn't working properly. There we go. Okay. So my elementary students, I would say, let's look at this pine cone. Let's look really close at this apple and let's draw this in our notebook and make notice or comments about what we're noticing, what we're seeing. And I would say to my students, you're being like a scientist now. And Adam stopped me and he said, no, 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 they're not being like a scientist. They are being scientists when they are looking closely and drawing and noticing and observing. So I love that story about the fish. When I was in college, I had my sculpture professor in my freshman sculpture class actually told us that story as well. And so the story, I think, is designed for scientists to say you really need to observe. And I love that my art teacher used the same story to say really looking closely is what we need to do to be really fantastic artists. Oh, I love these pictures that you guys are sharing with us. Oh, that's so cool. And then we have another fish. That's awesome. Whew. This one's cool because this artist saw that the rainbow only covered part of the page. And so really took advantage of how that was, we had these emptier areas. I love that. I have to say, I'm so kind of amazed and proud of you guys that you were able to make rainbow paper, make art with it, and post it on Padlet all at the same time. I was thinking that was a lot to ask, and you guys are nailing it. So fantastic. Oops. I love that, a rainbow unicorn. That is fantastic. Ah, that's cool. I remember when I was younger, I used to always have teachers who would do kind of a cool process. Ooh, I love this dragonfly, with spray paint and water and dip our paper in it. And then we would have to turn that swirl into some kind of picture. And I see some of you are doing things like that, which is really great. I was wondering if anybody else had new ideas about what you could use this kind of paper for in your class. Oh, I like this one. You're one of a kind. I think you could really use it for anything that you use any other kind of paper, colored paper. It just kind of punches it up a level into being kind of awesome and glittery and rainbowy. I like this, that you were kind of finding those patterns within it. Well, that really does come to the end of my presentation. But what I want to recommend to you guys, I have actually I have one more thing I want to share, which is perfect. But this idea of noticing and wondering and experimenting and creating, I think we can do that all the time and really roll arts and sciences and engineering all together as we're doing these things. And I would hope, my husband said, what do you hope people take away from this event the most? And I said, well, I want them to recognize that what we're doing with rainbow paper, we could have done with anything. I could have sent you some oil pastels or some watercolor pencils. It's about experimenting with the materials. And I think you could do the same process where you passed out something new and said, let's play around with this. Now let's ask some questions. Now let's form some real experiments and investigations to see what we can do with this new thing that we're learning about. So I hope, that's my biggest hope, that you would go back and do some experimenting, some investigating with your students and their art materials. Now, I don't have it up here now, so I'm just going to stop my share, but I have a handout for you that will be in the shared folder that it goes through everything we talked about, but I have one more piece that I added to that I didn't think we'd have time to talk about together. And it's this idea of teaching with phenomena. And when I heard about that, I thought, well, that's how we teach art classes too. And I think in the art classroom, we can think of multiple things as the phenomena that is kind of inspiring our students to think and to wonder. And I think it can be naturally occurring phenomena, like anything that we would learn about in those science lessons and science guides that we heard about from Melissa. So it could be something like noticing the leaves on a quaking aspen sort of glitter when it moves in the sunlight and the wind, and saying, what's causing that? So natural phenomena, we can use actually works of art or artists as our phenomena and say, how did they do that? How might I do that? I think we can use our art processes like we did today, or our art materials as kind of that inspiration and starting point to have our students wonder and figure out what they create. Okay, Tamara, I think that's my time. I hear my bells ringing here that say it's 7 o'clock. I don't know, maybe I go to 7:05, but I think I'll go ahead and end early if that's okay. We'll do questions.
Of course. Thank you so much, Alisa. That was really fun. I made some cool stuff. All right, we are going to take some questions. I'm going to invite Adam to come back and join us as well. And just a quick reminder, we're going to use the Q&A function. So feel free to go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A function, and that way we can find them quickly. And I see there's a couple in there. Someone was saying that the BYU art endorsement is awesome at integrating art and science, and gives a link there. That is absolutely true. So we're going to go ahead and you can check out that link there. Jaden was asking a couple questions. What happens when you add other colors? So people were really experimenting.
So I have a question because I didn't try other colors. The red didn't spread out well. I'm wondering if it would be clear enough to create iridescence on this paper, or if you would just see the color. I'm curious.
Do you think kindergarten kids could make the rainbow paper?
That's a good question. I almost would want to ask a kindergarten teacher from the audience to say in the chat. I was an art teacher, so I feel like I would probably try it, and I would probably have some helpers with me to try it out as well, to work with each group.
We had someone answer yes, and someone answered maybe another supply besides the nail polish could be used. Wondering about that. Great. We have someone who's going to try it tomorrow, I think maybe with kindergartners. So I'm just flipping through the questions here. Trying to figure out how to tie it in, maybe to what they're already working on in class. Someone wrote, I think kindergartners could do it in small groups. So working as a group. Great.
Yeah, maybe as a center instead of having 6 groups going at once, they can rotate through that center.
A little more controlled. All right, I am new to this, so I am wondering how you manage a classroom with these activities. I have several rambunctious classes of about 30 kiddos. Could I do this? It's super cool.
I would have done it. I teach at the university level now, but when I was an elementary art teacher, I would have done this. But I would really talk about expectations. I would model very clearly. So I would really demonstrate how to do it. And then I would demonstrate again, but ask the students to walk me through the steps and ask them to walk me through pitfalls and things that we should try to avoid so that we can be successful, you know. And then they say, like, don't pour it out on the table and don't paint your hands with it, you know. So I let the kids bring up those ideas instead of me just saying don't. And then let them do it and let them know that I trust them to do it. And yeah, I would do it.
Great. And I'm here. People are throwing stuff in the chat too that are also really great suggestions. You could do it with one small group at a time. Someone is asking for, I'm going to go ahead and put the link to the Google folder with all of the resources that you guys have to provide in there. Because one of the questions is, can we get a list of the real life uses of iridescence that you referenced?
So what I did on the handout was I said, here are some ideas you could explore. And then I kind of wrote down what it was, but not any links, so that you and your students could maybe do that research together. But Tamara, if you want me to actually find or get the links and then submit them as well, I can do that as well. But I just thought, oh, this would be fun for you guys to find it, but I'll tell you what to look for. Yeah.
Great. So you all now have the link to the Google folder. We may be adding things by request. All right. So that's great. Can tie it into natural camouflage, animals using light to hide. Great.
I just to add to that,
Yeah.
besides, I can't think of issues of or examples of camouflage, but stuff like peacock feathers, butterfly feathers, those kinds of things are, you get those really bright blues and purples and such from the same iridescent properties that are going on here.
And I should mention, my slideshow was so long, I cut things out, but I also went down a rabbit hole of the idea of biomimicry, right? And that's really riddled it, or just full or scattered, I guess, throughout the whole seed standards, is how do we look at what's happening in nature to find solutions for the problems that we have? And a really cool example is, you know, people have looked at those little scales on butterfly wings and tried to reproduce those, but they're finding that they do more than just change the color. They can regulate temperature. And so they're using some of those to regulate temperature on aircraft or spaceships or buildings, you know, little things where we say, how is it happening in nature? And how might we do that too, which is so neat.
We had a question. Are you guys going to make the Padlets available for us to look at? Is that something we can put in the Google folder as well?
Yes, so I think we'll leave them live for a little bit. Maybe we'll stop new comments in the next hour and then leave them live. And then I haven't used it enough, but I bet there's a way that we can sort of turn it into a PDF that we can take down later, but let you have the archive.
Adam, did you include your secret bubble recipe in the Google folder?
Yeah, I added a link on I've got one doc that has links of resources, and that included a demonstration of how to make the super bubbles.
I love this one too. Is this how mood rings work?
I
you go ahead.
It is.
What's that?
I bet there's iridescence in those mood rings, but I don't know.
So that's a really good question to go find out the answer, right? That's the kind of thing I kept finding. Oh, what about?
Love it. And a bunch of people writing in to say they've tried this with kindergartners or young ones they have at home, and it's working with a little bit of supervision. All right. Any more questions for our presenters? Just waiting to see if anything rolls in. So many great comments, both in the questions and in this chat, as I'm trying to look at both at the same time.
I should say that I made, it's like 400 pieces of little tiny rainbow paper to send out in the kits. And My office would get kind of fumy, which didn't bother me, but I think if you did this with your class, open your windows if you can, figure something out so that you can have a little bit of airflow.
Ventilation, important. All right, a lot of people thanking us. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to put the link for the Google form in the chat. And just a reminder, please fill this out. We really do want to hear what you have to say, what you got out of this, anything we can improve on. And also, when you return this to us, we can send you your certificate of completion for relicensure points. So I'll put that in there a couple times. Everybody has a lot to say, which is great. And that is the end of today then. No other questions are coming into Q&A. That is the completion of our time together. And I will stay on the line and just put the survey link into the chat a couple more times, just in case people need that. But otherwise, I'll share my screen one more time. There it is. Thank you so much. Thank you, presenters, and thank you everyone who joined us tonight from all over Utah. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
All right, again, I'll stay on the line and keep entering the survey link for those who need it.
Thanks, Tamara. Thanks, Alisa. This was really fun.